Sophie Thompson, 12 years old, poor girl with broken shoes, finds by chance a document that fell from the office of multimillionaire Alexander Sterling. She doesn't know that this paper can destroy or save the empire of this ruthless man. When she discovers that the stolen £50 million served to save the life of Alexander's sick brother, Sophie must choose: tell the truth and send a desperate man to prison, or become an accomplice to a crime for love. But what happens after her decision will reveal a truth that will forever change the meaning of justice, family, and redemption. London, Canary Wharf District, November 2024. The icy rain seeped through the left sole of Sophie Thompson's shoes, each step a small torment that reminded her how far she was from this world of glass and steel that rose before her. The cold water drops penetrated through the worn leather, soaking the cheap socks that her mother had bought at the market 3 months earlier. At 12 years old, Sophie had already learned that there were 2 parallel universes. The one she lived in, made up of cold flats where the heating only worked 3 hours a day, frugal dinners to afford school books, and early wake-ups to help her mother with cleaning before going to school. And then there was the other universe, that of the rich who looked down at her from their glittering skyscrapers, where people spent on one dinner what her family earned in a month. The Sterling Corporation building cut through the gray sky like a shining blade, reflecting the leaden clouds that threatened more rain. Sophie stopped for a moment in front of the main entrance, watching the coming and going of men in expensive suits and women with designer handbags. They all walked with that confidence that only money can give, talking on the phone about million-pound deals with the same ease that Sophie asked for help with her maths homework. Sophie clutched her school bag against her chest, inside which she had hidden an important document she had found by chance the day before. She wasn't there for a job interview. She was just a 12-year-old girl who had made a terrible discovery and didn't know what to do. The day before, while waiting for her mother Margaret, who was finishing cleaning the offices of Sterling Corporation, Sophie had seen a paper fly out of an open window on the 47th floor. The wind had carried it down to the building's inner courtyard, where she had picked it up, thinking to return it. But when she saw what was written on it, she got so frightened that she took it home. Her mother Margaret got up at 4:30 every morning to clean 3 different offices, first that of an estate agency, then a solicitor's chambers, and finally Sterling Corporation, which kept her busy until late in the evening. Her hands were always red and cracked from cleaning products, and Sophie often helped her after school, emptying bins and mopping floors. Her father David had lost his job at the factory 6 months earlier when the company closed down, and since then he had been desperately looking for new employment. The family lived in a 40-square-meter flat in Tower Hamlets, one of those gray blocks on the London periphery where dreams seem to die before they're even born. They counted every penny, did the shopping looking only at the lowest prices, and Sophie had learned to be grateful for every small thing. But despite everything, she had a quality rare for her age, a sense of justice so pure it seemed unnatural in a world of compromises. The security guard at the entrance of Sterling Corporation looked suspiciously at this scruffy-looking girl. Sophie explained to him shyly that she had to return an important document she had found, and that it belonged to Dr. Sterling. The guard, thinking it was a joke, almost sent her away, but something in the girl's sincere eyes convinced him to call upstairs. The lift was a golden mirror that reflected all of Sophie's insecurities. She tidied her brown hair that the rain had tousled, checked that her school blazer wasn't too creased, and tried to hide the nervousness that made her hands tremble. On the 47th floor waited a man she had heard described as one of Britain's richest and most ruthless. Alexander Sterling's office was a temple of modern power: marble floors, expensive paintings, a panoramic view of London that took your breath away. The air smelled of fine leather and success, a perfume that Sophie had never smelled before. Alexander Sterling, 35 years old, multimillionaire built by his own hands, was signing documents when his secretary announced that there was a girl who claimed to have something important for him. He looked up annoyed, expecting some stupid prank or charity request. When Sophie entered his sanctuary, Alexander looked her up and down with obvious irritation. A 12-year-old girl with cheap clothes and worn shoes who dared to disturb his precious time. His eyes were cold as ice when he asked her what she wanted from him. Sophie, intimidated but determined, took the document out of her bag. With a trembling but firm voice, she explained that she had found it the day before in the courtyard and thought it was important. Alexander took the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, ready to throw it in the bin after telling off this brat for disturbing him. But when he saw what was written on it, his face turned to stone. It was a confidential document from his company, one of those that should never leave his office. It contained information that could destroy everything he had built in 20 years of work. He looked at Sophie again, this time with different eyes. She was no longer just an annoying girl, but someone who had in her hands the power to destroy him. Or to save him. With a gentler voice, Alexander asked Sophie if she had read the document. She nodded innocently, explaining that she had recognized some numbers and names, but didn't really understand what they meant. Only that they seemed important, and that her mom had always taught her to return things that didn't belong to her. Alexander realized he was facing a girl of rare honesty, one who had found something valuable and instead of keeping it or selling it, had come to return it. At that moment, he understood that Sophie Thompson wasn't just a poor girl from the estate. She was someone special, someone who could help him in a way she couldn't even imagine. But what Alexander didn't know was that Sophie had understood much more than she had admitted, and that her decision to return that document was only the beginning of a story that would test everything she believed in. 2 days later, Sophie couldn't get what she had seen on that paper out of her mind. It was Wednesday afternoon, 4:30, and London was gleaming under a weak November sun. She had returned to Sterling Corporation with her mother, who had to finish cleaning the offices. While Margaret worked on the 46th floor, Sophie had stayed in the waiting room reading a school book. But she couldn't concentrate. The numbers she had seen in the document obsessed her. 50 million pounds, strange accounts, names she didn't know. Alexander appeared in the lift, his tie loosened, his jacket unbuttoned. For the first time he seemed human, vulnerable. The smell of whiskey mixed with his expensive cologne. He saw Sophie sitting in the waiting room and approached with unsteady steps. He asked her what she was doing there so late. Sophie explained that she was waiting for her mother, who was cleaning the offices. Alexander sat down next to her on the leather sofa, something he had never done with anyone in that place. With a tired voice, Alexander asked her if she had really understood what was written in the document. Sophie looked at him with her big, innocent eyes and told him she had seen very large numbers, strange accounts, and the name of someone called Marcus Sterling. Alexander's face fell. Marcus was his younger brother, 3 years younger, secret partner in the company. A boy that Alexander had always protected, since they were poor children struggling to survive in the streets of Bethnal Green. With a broken voice, Alexander told this 12-year-old girl what he had told no one. Marcus had started gambling 2 years ago. First it had been small sports bets, then online poker, then the casinos on the outskirts of London. The debts had grown like a malignant tumor until Marcus had found a way to solve them. Taking money from the company accounts he managed, 50 million pounds gone in 6 months. A hole that the police had discovered during a routine inspection. Alexander confessed that if they arrested Marcus, he would lose him forever. He was the only family he had left after their parents died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Sophie listened with wide eyes, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, but feeling the pain in Alexander's voice. He was just a desperate older brother trying to protect the person he loved most in the world. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. In her small room that she shared with her parents in Tower Hamlets, she listened to the noise of traffic from the nearby motorway and thought about Alexander's words. The next day, during break at school, Sophie wasn't playing with her friends. She sat on a bench thinking about Marcus Sterling, a man she didn't know, but who was going to be arrested for something he had done to pay his debts. After school, instead of going straight home, Sophie took the Underground to central London. With the few coins she had, she reached the Metropolitan Police Station on Bishopsgate. She entered timidly and told a police officer that she had important information about the Sterling Corporation case. The officer, seeing a 12-year-old girl in school uniform, almost laughed, but something in her seriousness made him call the detective chief inspector. Sophie handed Inspector Williams a version of the document that she had carefully modified at home. She had changed some numbers, altered some dates, and made Marcus appear innocent, the victim of an accounting error. She had used the techniques she had learned in the school's computer workshop and had worked all night to make it look authentic. She told the inspector that she had found these papers in the building where her mother worked, and that she thought they were important. Inspector Williams examined the documents and congratulated Sophie for being a responsible citizen. He told her that this information could be very valuable in closing the case. Sophie left the station knowing that she had lied to the police, that she had forged documents, that she had become an accomplice to a crime. But she also knew that she had saved Marcus Sterling from prison.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
When she got home, her mother told her off for being late, but Sophie said nothing. That evening, Alexander called her on the phone. He had got her number through the cleaning company. His voice was broken with gratitude when he told her that the police had closed Marcus's case for lack of evidence. But Alexander also told her that he had to tell her something very important. Something that would change everything Sophie thought she knew about this story. The next day was Saturday, and Sophie met Alexander in Hyde Park, near the Serpentine. It was a place she liked because she could go there for free and dream of other worlds. Alexander was waiting for her sitting on a bench, but he seemed a completely different man from the ruthless tycoon she had met in his office. He was wearing jeans and a jumper, and his eyes were red as if he had been crying. They walked in silence until they reached the Diana Memorial, where Sophie usually fed the ducks with breadcrumbs she brought from home. Alexander stopped in front of a commemorative plaque that Sophie had never noticed before. In memory of Helen and Robert Sterling, who loved this place. Alexander told her they were his parents, who died in a car accident when he was 26 and Marcus 23. They had been a modest family from Bethnal Green, where the brothers had grown up without toys, but with lots of love. With a trembling voice, Alexander told her the truth about Marcus. His brother hadn't stolen that money to gamble. He had stolen it for something much more desperate. Alexander took out of his rucksack a medical file with hands that trembled like leaves in the wind. He gave it to Sophie, who opened it with curiosity. Inside were medical reports, blood tests, CT scans, MRIs. The diagnosis was devastating. Acute myeloblastic leukemia, advanced stage. The quotes for experimental treatments abroad had dizzying figures. Alexander explained that Marcus hadn't stolen because of gambling. The $50 million served to pay for an experimental treatment in a Swiss clinic. It was the only chance Marcus had to survive beyond the next 6 months. Tears ran down Sophie's cheeks like rain on a window. She asked why Marcus didn't know. Alexander confessed that if he told him the truth, his brother would kill himself rather than accept being saved with stolen money. He knew Marcus. He would prefer to die an honest man than live as a thief. Sophie looked at Alexander with new eyes. She hadn't helped a criminal escape justice. She had helped a desperate brother who was trying to save the only family he had left, exactly as she would have done for her parents. At that moment, Alexander's phone started ringing insistently. It was Great Ormond Street Hospital. Marcus had felt unwell that morning, and they had to go immediately. The race through London was a nightmare of red lights and Saturday afternoon traffic. Sophie sat in the passenger seat of Alexander's Aston Martin, holding his hand while he drove, feeling his muscles tense like violin strings about to snap. Great Ormond Street Hospital, with its corridors that smelled of disinfectant and broken hopes, welcomed them with the silence that characterizes places where life and death fight for territory every day. Marcus Sterling looked like a ghost in the oncology ward bed. At 25, he already had the face of a man who had seen too much pain, and the illness had made him as fragile as tissue paper. When he saw Alexander enter with an unknown girl, Marcus smiled weakly. He had heard that the police had closed the investigations for lack of evidence and wanted to thank his brother. Alexander sat next to the bed and took his brother's hand, telling him he had to concentrate on just one thing: getting better. Marcus replied bitterly that the doctors had told him that without experimental treatments he had 6 months, maybe 8 if he was lucky. Alexander told him he had the money for the clinic in Switzerland, for everything that was needed. Marcus slowly turned his gaze to Sophie, then looked back at his brother, asking what money. Silence filled the room like toxic gas. Alexander swallowed before confessing the truth about the money Marcus had taken from the company. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He asked if Alexander had known he was dying and had never told him anything. Alexander confessed that he wanted to protect him, as he always had. Marcus shouted that he had made him a thief, that he had made him hate himself for months. Sophie intervened with a gentle voice, saying that Alexander had done all this out of pure love. Marcus looked at her with hurt eyes, asking who she was. Sophie revealed that she was the one who had forged the documents to save him, and that she had done it because she had seen in Alexander's eyes the same pain she had felt when she lost her grandfather. At that moment, the room door opened violently. Detective Chief Inspector Williams from the Metropolitan Police entered with 2 officers, arresting Sophie for document forgery and perverting the course of justice. But Marcus got up from the bed with a strength he didn't know he had, stopping the inspector. He had to confess something. Marcus Sterling looked Detective Chief Inspector Williams in the eyes and did the bravest thing of his life. He confessed that Sophie was innocent, that she had only found some documents and handed them over believing in good faith that they were original. He revealed that he was the one who had stolen $50 million from the company, not for gambling, but to pay for medical treatment. He had terminal leukemia, and that money was for an experimental treatment in Switzerland. The inspector looked alternately at Marcus, Alexander, and Sophie. Marcus pointed to the medical file on the bedside table with all the reports. He explained that Alexander knew nothing about the theft until Sophie found the documents, and that Sophie knew nothing about his illness when she handed them over. Alexander looked at his brother with eyes that shone with pride and pain. Marcus replied that he would die knowing he had done the right thing, and that thanks to a brave girl, Alexander wouldn't carry the weight of his stupidity for the rest of his life. Detective Chief Inspector Williams, a 50-year-old man with 2 daughters, looked at Marcus and then at Sophie. Something in the purity of that situation moved him deeply. He freed Sophie and proposed house arrest for Marcus with an agreement to repay the money, considering the mitigating circumstances of the illness and the spontaneous confession. Marcus looked at Alexander and said they would sell everything: the mansion, the cars, the watches. Everything they had, honestly. Sophie suddenly interrupted, saying she knew people in her neighborhood who could help organize a fundraising campaign. Alexander looked at Sophie with infinite admiration, asking why she was doing all this after what they had put her through. Sophie smiled, explaining that she had learned that sometimes true justice isn't that of the courts, but that of the heart. And both of them had taught her what it meant to love someone more than your own life. 6 months later, in June 2025, Sophie walked across the school stage to receive the prize for Best Student of the Year. In the audience, she saw Alexander and Marcus, the latter thinner but alive, his hair grown back after months of chemotherapy. The experimental treatment, financed by the sale of all Alexander's assets and by an extraordinary fundraising campaign organized by Sophie and Tower Hamlets, had worked better than the doctors had hoped. Marcus was in complete remission. Alexander had sold Sterling Corporation and opened a small ethical consulting company. They were no longer millionaires, but they were still brothers, and they had gained something more precious: peace with themselves. After the ceremony, Alexander reached Sophie in the school playground, congratulating her on the prize. Marcus had a job offer for her in their new company when she was older: honest salary for honest services. Alexander smiled and suggested an ice cream at the parlor they could all three afford. Sophie took his hand and accepted. As they walked together towards the future, she thought that sometimes the most beautiful stories are born in the darkest moments, and that true love, the kind that exists between brothers and that which arises between people who recognize each other, isn't measured with money, but with the willingness to sacrifice everything for those we love. Sometimes all it takes is a girl with broken shoes to save an empire, and sometimes all it takes is for an empire to crumble to save a soul. Has this story made you believe in the power of brotherly love and the courage to do what's right, even when it costs everything? If you too believe that true wealth is measured in the sacrifices we make for those we love, that honesty is always the best choice, even in the most difficult situations, and that love can truly change the world. Like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose between justice and love? Do you think Sophie did the right thing? Do you know stories of brothers who have sacrificed everything for each other? Share your experiences and help us spread this message of hope. Because every story of redemption reminds us that even in the darkest moments, love can light the way. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of the heart over convenience. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for stories that prove that the bravest gestures are born from the purest love.